Have you ever trusted someone so completely you stopped reading the fine print of your own life? My name is Eli Turner. 2 months ago, I received a video message that changed everything. In it, my wife Lena smiled into the camera, glass of champagne in hand, standing beside Tyler Voss, the tech world's favorite visionary and apparently her new partner in both business and life. She wore a diamond watch I'd never seen before and said, with the ease of someone ordering coffee, "I've moved on. You will too." There were no tears, no apologies, just the kind of cold, polished confidence that comes from knowing you've left with the upper hand. Or so she thought. I didn't scream, I didn't beg, I didn't even reply. Because by the time Lena emptied our joint accounts and launched her new company using my stolen ideas, I was already 10 steps ahead. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's not even about money. It's about how trust, once broken, reveals the true architecture of a relationship, and what happens when the person you underestimate turns out to be the only one who was paying attention all along. Let me show you what that looked like. At first, I tried to pretend it wasn't what it looked like: the late nights, the brand consulting retreats that never showed up on our calendar, the soft silence that had replaced conversation at the dinner table. I'd attributed it all to burnout, to Lena's ambition, to the natural ebb and flow of a marriage that had lasted nearly 9 years. We were both busy professionals living in a world that rewarded hustle and punished stillness. Maybe, I told myself, we'd simply drifted. Nothing malicious, just a failure to recalibrate. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It began with her laughter, not the kind we used to share. Private, spontaneous, slightly conspiratorial, but a new, calculated kind I overheard through the walls during her client calls. There was a tone to it, the laugh of someone seeking validation, of someone performing. And then there were the details. A $3,200 charge from a hotel in New York when she was supposedly in San Diego. An Uber ride that ended 3 blocks from a rooftop bar owned by one of Tyler Voss's investment partners. A text notification I saw by accident. He's brilliant, but so safe. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid, possessive, maybe even unfair. So I pulled back. I gave her more space, more trust, more room to grow. I stopped asking questions, hoping she'd come back on her own, but instead she drifted further. Her phone was always face down. She'd stop mid-scroll when I entered the room. Our physical intimacy dwindled to a formality. I'd kiss her forehead before bed and she'd mumble something about being tired. It hurt, but the pain was dull, like a chronic ache. It didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly through small acts of omission, half-truths, and silences that used to be filled with love. I started waking up before my alarm, not with anxiety, but with clarity. Something had changed. And maybe the worst part was that it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, sterile, emotionally efficient. One night I sat alone in our kitchen, staring at the untouched dinner I'd made. I looked around the house we'd designed together, mid-century fixtures, floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with design books she never read. It didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a showroom she'd curated for a life she no longer wanted. Still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because I'd seen enough in my work, data breaches, internal sabotage, corporate espionage, to know that reacting too early only gave your opponent the advantage. And somehow, that's what Lena had become. Not a wife making a mistake. A person with a plan. One she thought I was too dull, too loyal, too safe to notice. So I stayed quiet. I studied. I tracked. I took mental notes. And with every late return, every cryptic smile aimed at her phone, every vague explanation about where the money was going, I stopped mourning the marriage we had and began preparing for the one we were about to unravel. Because the thing about trust is, it's not always lost in a single moment. Sometimes it erodes over time, until one day you look across the table at someone you've loved for years and realize you don't recognize their eyes anymore. Lena and I met the way a lot of people do these days, by algorithm, a dating app that promised compatibility through data points and shared values. I remember her profile photo vividly. Standing on a rooftop in Barcelona, the wind teasing her dark hair, a glass of sangria in her hand, and a grin that said she wasn't afraid of anything. Our first conversation was about the future of digital privacy and whether influencers were just salespeople in prettier packaging. She had opinions, sharp, irreverent, well-informed. I was hooked. At the time, I was 30 and already well into a career in cybersecurity consulting. My world was spreadsheets, encrypted servers, and risk mitigation models. Lena, 2 years younger, worked in digital branding and PR. She was ambitious in a way that felt like gravity, always moving upward, always reaching. Where I saw potential liabilities, she saw untapped opportunities. She called me her anchor, and I called her my spark. We moved quickly. Within 9 months we were living together, and a year later, we were married in a quiet ceremony on a hillside in Big Sur. No frills, just a few close friends and an ocean breeze. We wanted something simple, something real. For the first few years we thrived. Our strengths balanced each other. I managed our investments, optimized our finances, kept our life efficient. She expanded her freelance business into a boutique agency, building personal brands for tech executives and influencers trying to rebrand after scandals. Lena had a talent for making people look better than they deserved, and they paid her handsomely for it. We bought a house in the Silver Lake neighborhood of Los Angeles, modern with clean lines and a view of the reservoir. We furnished it slowly, artisanal, ceramics from road trips, a couch we both hated but kept because we picked it together, coffee table books we pretended to read. There was an ease to our life, dinner parties, beach weekends, inside jokes. Looking back, I realized Lena was always chasing something, bigger rooms, brighter lights, better connections. At first I admired it. Her drive made me want more for myself and for us. But at some point that drive stopped including me. She began to speak in aspirational language that didn't sound like her. Scaling influence, quantifiable, clout, personal capital. The words felt borrowed from her clients. One of them in particular, Tyler Voss, had started showing up more often in her stories. At first, she framed it as a professional relationship. "He's trying to pivot into healthcare tech," she'd say. "It's good for business if I'm attached to someone with vision." I didn't protest. I believed in her work. I respected it. But I also started to feel like a footnote in my own life. She was moving faster than I could track. Late-night calls with founders, weekend trips that turned into Monday absences, new clothes I hadn't seen her buy. There was an energy about her I couldn't reach. We stopped aligning. Where I once found comfort, I began to feel tension. Every conversation became about branding, optics, positioning. I'd talk about upgrading our retirement portfolios, and she'd nod distractedly while texting. I'd mention data breaches or ransomware threats, and she'd change the subject to vibe curation and digital storytelling. I suppose I was naive to think we were still building the same life, that our goals were still shared. But here's what I know now. People don't always leave with a suitcase. Sometimes they start packing piece by piece in quiet decisions you don't notice until the house feels empty, even while they're still in it. By the time Lena started disappearing, emotionally, she had already begun disappearing financially. I just didn't know it yet. And the version of her I fell in love with, that curious, driven, unfiltered woman on a rooftop in Spain, had long been replaced by someone else. Someone rehearsed, someone edited, a person I might still admire in a magazine profile, but wouldn't recognize across our kitchen table. It wasn't one big moment that tipped me off. It was a series of small glitches, like a system running just slightly off spec. And I've spent my career reading between lines most people don't even notice. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence, then to miscommunication. But eventually, I started documenting. Lena's schedule became elusive. She'd leave town on Thursday night for what she called executive branding intensives in San Francisco or Miami, but the receipts told a different story. Uber drop-offs near Soho House, West Hollywood, when she said she was at a hotel downtown. Her flights were booked under her business account, but some of the destination logs didn't match her calendar. I began doing what I do best, quietly gathering intel. It started with digital hygiene. I installed non-invasive monitoring on our shared cloud accounts, just alerts on activity, nothing invasive or illegal. We had nothing to hide from each other, or so I thought. But suddenly I was getting pings about file uploads at 2 a.m. from an IP address registered to Manhattan. She told me she was in Palo Alto that weekend. Her Instagram told one story: clean aesthetics, motivational captions, empty sunsets. But I found a tagged image buried in a post from a micro-influencer, Lena, laughing beside Tyler Voss at a private fundraiser in Brooklyn. No mention of the event in her planner, no photos on her own feed, just shadows of a life I wasn't invited into. I didn't react, not outwardly. I kept showing up, kept making dinner, kept leaving a light on when she got back late. But I was watching everything. And when you've spent over a decade reading the fine print of other people's lies, you learn to stay quiet long enough to collect proof. Tyler Voss wasn't just another flashy client. He was the face of a new wave of tech evangelists, charismatic, polarizing, and incredibly strategic. He had an uncanny ability to sell people on disruption while hiding the wreckage behind closed doors. I remembered reading about an SEC fine he paid 5 years ago, buried beneath layers of shell companies. It wasn't illegal exactly, just clever. And Lena admired clever. She began referencing Tyler more and more. Not just professionally, personally, casually, like he was the sun around which she was beginning to orbit. Tyler thinks I should do a podcast. Tyler says we're entering the age of branded intimacy. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. Then came the receipts. A $9,800 charge to her business Amex for a strategic branding collateral. When I traced the vendor, it led to a boutique agency in Austin that specialized in stealth startup launches. One of their recent clients? A beta app that bore a striking resemblance to a proprietary design I had shown Lena months before. An anonymized cyber risk tracking system I'd been conceptualizing in my spare time. She'd called it brilliant but boring. Now suddenly, her branding firm was backing a nearly identical concept. With Tyler Voss listed as visionary co-founder, I knew then this wasn't an affair of the heart. It was a heist, not just of love or loyalty, but of ideas, of value, of identity. And the worst part wasn't that she'd done it behind my back. It was that she genuinely believed I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't understand the game she was playing. Or worse, that I wasn't capable of playing it better. That was her first mistake, and I wasn't about to correct it. Not yet. After the pieces began falling into place, I did what I'd trained myself to do over years in cybersecurity. I built a firewall. Not one made of code, but of quiet, legal, financial layers designed to protect what mattered most. Lena thought I was distracted. In reality, I was laying down the architecture of control, something she'd underestimated precisely because I never flaunted it. The first step was separating the money. We'd always had joint accounts, but like most couples, Lena was far more interested in where the money could take us than how it was structured. She'd never once opened a brokerage statement. She never asked questions when I updated our financial models or filed tax extensions. That blind trust used to feel like intimacy. Now it was leverage. I began restructuring our assets under the umbrella of a dormant LLC I had formed years ago for consulting side work, Turner Strategic Solutions. I updated its filing status, appointed myself sole managing member, and gradually began reallocating funds. Not in bulk. Nothing that would trigger a bank alert or seem suspicious. Just small, methodical movements, portfolio transfers, deferred, compensation, recategorized holdings. By the time I was finished, nearly 80% of our liquid assets were legally separated, traceable only to me and the business. Next came the paper trail. I drafted a routine set of annual tax forms and had Lena sign them without a second glance. They included disclosures that assigned me full discretionary authority over our shared investment account. I also revised the operating agreement for the LLC, and tucked it in among the stack of paperwork she routinely dismissed as your territory. After that, I hired a compliance attorney, just a name on retainer, under the guise of an upcoming contract with a medical data firm. Lena didn't blink. It gave me the legal foundation I needed to begin protecting our IP, filing trademarks, and documenting my proprietary design drafts. The system she had repackaged with Tyler wasn't fully mine, not yet, but it was enough to prove authorship, enough to trigger action if challenged. I also upgraded our home network, subtly, of course. I changed router settings, installed logging systems, monitored outbound traffic. Lena's laptop was her own, but she used our Wi-Fi. Every time she uploaded a file, visited a project portal, or joined a video call, a fingerprint remained. I mirrored that data off-site and archived it. Not to use immediately, just to hold, just in case. What surprised me most during that time was how calm I felt. There was no rage, no panic, no spiraling late-night thoughts. Only a quiet sense of inevitability, like watching a chess game unfold after already having seen the endgame. Lena thought she had momentum. In truth, she was playing on a board I had built. One night, while she was in New York, meeting investors, I sat in the kitchen she'd insisted we renovate for $90,000 and reviewed our prenuptial agreement. I'd forgotten it existed. Ironically, she'd insisted on it back when she earned more than I did. The irony of her once demanding legal clarity to protect herself was almost poetic. I filed it away and turned my attention to a document I hadn't looked at in months, my will. Another opportunity. I updated beneficiaries, removed her from life insurance policies she didn't even know existed, redirected everything to a trust under my LLC. It wasn't revenge, it was cleanup, and it was overdue. I kept smiling when she called, kept texting back casually, kept playing the part of the patient, oblivious husband, because timing mattered, because catching a thief is one thing. Watching them walk into a trap of their own design is something else entirely. Lena thought she was moving fast, that she'd built a vehicle too sleek, too clever for me to follow. But I wasn't chasing her. I was building the roadblock, and soon, she'd hit it at full speed. The confirmation came not from a mistake, but from a moment of pride. Hers. It was a Tuesday evening, and Lena was still in New York, allegedly finalizing a strategic brand alignment for a high-profile client. I was finishing up a security audit for a fintech startup when a notification popped up on my screen, an automated scrape I'd set to track domain registrations tied to her LLC. A new site had just gone live. The domain? canvasiq.com. Clean, modern, full of empty buzzwords like behavioral intelligence and predictive insight platforms. At first glance, it looked like every other VC-funded nothing burger. But then I read the product description. The adaptive threat detection model they were pitching was nearly word for word the early-stage concept I had drafted 6 months earlier, a side project I'd built in my spare time, never launched, never even mentioned outside our house. The diagrams were simplified, the language rebranded, but the core logic, my logic, was unmistakable. There were 2 listed co-founders. Lena was one. Tyler Voss was the other. The site was polished, press-ready. They weren't building this in secret, they were preparing to launch. They'd filed a provisional patent for the platform 3 weeks prior. The filing agent? A boutique firm in Austin I'd worked with before. And the timestamp on the filing matched perfectly with one of Lena's branding retreats. I sat back, breathing evenly, my hands folded on the desk. Not out of shock. I'd expected something like this. But there's a difference between suspecting betrayal and seeing it spelled out in Helvetica Neue on a public landing page. Worse, I realized that Lena wasn't just walking away from me. She was trying to take my work with her. Package it as her own. Build her reputation on the back of my quiet effort, something she'd once called too niche to scale. I remembered showing her my early models over coffee one morning. She barely looked up from her phone. "Cool," she'd said, "but who's the audience?" Apparently now she had one. With Tyler as her social currency, she had the spotlight. and my work was her foundation. I opened the back end of the site. I'd already flagged the hosting provider. It was built on a platform I knew well, one I'd helped audit years ago. Within minutes, I'd archived the source code, grabbed the original upload timestamps, and captured metadata that proved authorship inconsistencies. Then I traced internal project files back to her personal cloud, right where she'd unknowingly synced them from our home network. It was everything. I needed theft, intent, timeline, partnership. They'd built their castle unaware that the land underneath still belonged to me, and as I sat there, staring at the digital monument to her ambition, I didn't feel rage. I felt a clarity so sharp, it felt like silence. She hadn't just underestimated me, she'd forgotten who I was. Now she was about to remember. 2 days after I discovered Canvas IQ, the betrayal finally hit in full. Not in theory, not in suspicion, but in undeniable action. A notification from our joint investment account arrived while I was reviewing archived logs. At first, I assumed it was routine, one of those minor auto transfers I'd set up for monthly portfolio rebalancing. But when I opened the account dashboard, the balance dropped so low I actually refreshed the page thinking it hadn't fully loaded. It had over $600,000 had been liquidated in a single transaction. Tax-advantaged accounts, dividend stocks, long-term, bonds, cashed out and wired to an external business account. The account was under Lena's LLC, the same one she used for freelance consulting. But the recipient notes told the full story. Product launch funding, IQ Innovations. That wasn't just a betrayal. That was premeditated theft, strategic and bold, but not invisible. I had left that account partially open on purpose, knowing it would be the most tempting, visible enough to bait, vulnerable enough to seem accessible, but traceable every step of the way, and she took the bait. Lena hadn't just walked out the door, she had gutted our future. This was the account we'd built over nearly a decade of joint planning. The one we'd agreed was meant for our down payment on a second property or the eventual nonprofit we'd dreamed of launching. I had matched her contributions, I had protected it, grown it, and she'd taken it all, without a word, without consent, believing I would be too slow, too stunned, or too forgiving to respond in time. She sent a voice memo that night. Her voice was calm, even warm. Eli, I know you're probably feeling blindsided, but I need you to understand something. I'm not running from you. I'm running towards something that feels bigger than anything we've built. Tyler sees that in me. And I think deep down, you knew this was coming. You've always been brilliant, and you'll be fine. You weren't meant to stay small with me. There it was, the polished exit monologue, the curated narrative of growth and self-actualization. She'd rehearsed it, scripted it like a brand launch, because that's what this was to her, just another rebrand, another campaign to control perception while walking away from the wreckage. But what she didn't know was that her perception campaign had already failed. I sat in silence for a few minutes after listening to the message, not because I was in pain, but because I was done, completely, finally done. All the wondering, the doubting, the effort to preserve something that had long since stopped being mutual. It dissolved into a simple, cold certainty. She was no longer my partner. She was my opponent, and I already had the playbook. By the time Lena and Tyler made their first move, I had already archived the proof, secured the funds she didn't know about, locked down the intellectual property, and prepared every legal document necessary to initiate a response she wouldn't see coming. She thought she'd pulled off a quiet escape. In truth, she'd walked straight into a trap, with timestamps, metadata, and paper trails stretching out behind her like breadcrumbs. She thought I'd panic. Instead, I smiled, let her celebrate. Let her believe she'd won. Because the next move, that was mine. Revenge isn't about rage, not for someone like me. It's not an explosion, it's a process. Slow, deliberate, precise. You don't win by striking first. You win by making sure when you strike it's irreversible. The morning after Lena's voice memo, I made 3 calls before my second cup of coffee. The first was to Daniel Green, a corporate attorney I'd worked with during a prior data breach case. He wasn't a divorce lawyer, but that wasn't what I needed him for. Not yet. I needed him for corporate structure, liability shielding, and IP protection. Daniel didn't ask for backstory, he didn't need it. He'd seen enough of these tech world betrayals to read between the lines. The second call was to my bank's fraud department. I reported the $600,000 withdrawal as unauthorized. Yes, I knew it came from a joint account, but Lena had forged my digital signature for the release forms, easily proven with IP logs and the fact that I was logged into a secure session on another device at the exact moment her approval occurred. The bank's compliance team flagged the transaction, froze the destination account, and escalated the matter to their internal legal unit. The third call was the most important. Jack. Jack is a forensic accountant who had helped me unwind a shell game in a corporate embezzlement case 2 years earlier. Brilliant, relentless, and methodical. I told him I needed everything. Every withdrawal Lena had made over the past year, every transfer to third parties, every redirection of business funds from our shared portfolio. I also gave him the names of 2 boutique agencies Lena had worked with recently, plus one name I hadn't spoken aloud until now. Tyler Voss. I need it airtight, I said. You'll have it, Jack replied. While Jack built the financial skeleton, I handled the digital side. I filed a DMCA claim on the Canvas IQ landing page and submitted documentation to the USPTO showing prior art and authorship of the IP. I didn't accuse them directly, not yet. Just enough pressure to force them into pause. No investor wants to fund a product flagged for intellectual property disputes. Then I prepared an anonymous packet, sent to 2 business journalists I trusted and 1 angel investor I knew Tyler had pitched within the last 6 months. The packet included anonymized metadata showing that Canvas IQ's code had originated on a personal network registered to me, filed weeks before Lena's LLC registered its patent. It also included public screenshots of Tyler's past ventures, 2 of which had quietly collapsed after investor disputes over murky tech claims. I didn't need the story to go public yet. I just needed them to start whispering. And they did. By the end of the week, Lena's LinkedIn went quiet. Tyler's social feed turned defensive. They posted vague updates about unexpected delays, and the Canvas IQ domain was redirected to a password-protected staging page. Investors began asking questions. One I heard through a mutual contact had already pulled their term sheet. But this was only the external layer. Internally, I was building the foundation for the legal strike. Daniel drafted a cease and desist letter citing IP theft, misappropriation of funds, and breach of fiduciary duty. The beauty was that everything Lena had done, every dollar she moved, every document she filed, was documented through systems I had built. She'd walked through every door I'd quietly left open, never once thinking to ask who held the keys. I didn't tell her what was coming. I let the silence work for me. The messages she sent after the first account freeze grew more anxious. At first it was concern, then confusion, then indignation, then silence. That same week, Jack sent me the first draft of his report. She's been siphoning for over 9 months, he said during our call. Not just the big accounts, small transfers disguised as operational expenses routed through shell vendors. Rough estimate, just north of $87,000, and here's the kicker. $24,000 of it went directly to an account tied to Voss. He paused. There's no way she didn't know, but I already did. She knew. And still she believed I'd roll over. She thought I'd be too decent, too non-confrontational to strike back. She'd mistaken my silence for surrender. But I wasn't retreating. I was sharpening the blade, and I was almost ready. The unraveling began quietly, almost politely, like a socialite slipping out of a party just before the scandal breaks. At first, it was just a few unreadable shifts in tone. Tyler's captions became less confident, more corporate. Lena's story posts dropped from 3 per day to 1 every other. Then came the announcement. Canvas IQ's product launch was being strategically delayed due to back-end optimizations. I smiled when I read it. Translated from startup speak, it meant lawyers had entered the room. Behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. My cease and desist letter had landed on Lena's legal team's desk the same morning their angel investor pulled funding. The investor, it turned out, had received the anonymous dossier. They'd run a private review, confirmed enough of the claims, and withdrawn immediately, citing concerns about IP provenance. It was elegant, clean, untraceable. Next came the media interest. A tech journalist I had worked with before reached out, off the record, curious. There's chatter that Voss is facing a quiet blackballing in 2 VC circles. His last 3 projects? All registered under different LLCs. One flagged for patent overlap. One settled a founder dispute out of court. You know anything about that? I didn't confirm or deny. I just asked one question. Would you be interested in an exclusive if this one followed the same pattern? By week's end, Lena's inbox must have been on fire. Her startup's PR firm issued a carefully worded statement about a temporary realignment of executive roles. Voss deleted over 100 tweets in a single afternoon. Their Crunchbase profile still listed them as pre-launch, but the edits told the real story. The empire they tried to build was sinking before it even got off the ground. Jack continued feeding me data. The $87,000 Lena had siphoned included travel expenses to cities she'd claimed were client-heavy, luxury hotel stays billed as workspace rentals, and multiple payments to a ghost marketing firm that turned out to be a single-person shell linked directly to Voss. She hadn't just funded Canvas IQ, she'd subsidized his lifestyle. And the best part? Most of the funds came from accounts listed jointly or from businesses partially backed by our marital assets. Legally, it was a minefield, and I had the map. Daniel sent an official filing to begin formal litigation proceedings. It wasn't just divorce. It was breach of fiduciary duty, willful misrepresentation, and IP infringement. He looped in 2 former colleagues with experience in high-stakes financial misconduct. By now, Lena's legal team had stopped posturing and started requesting private mediation. A polite way of saying, please don't take this public. But I wasn't looking for headlines, I was looking for accountability, and I wanted her to watch it happen. I didn't respond to her calls, her texts, or her increasingly panicked emails. I let the silence speak for itself. She sent one final message that simply read, Eli, please, we need to talk. Tyler isn't who I thought he was. Too late. She had gambled everything, our trust, our finances, my work, for a chance to stand in the reflected glow of a man who knew how to sell potential, but not how to build anything real. And now that the lights were going out, she wanted to come home. But home wasn't hers anymore. She didn't just lose a husband. She lost the safety of being underestimated, the privilege of not having to watch her back. The reckoning had begun, and this time the story wouldn't be told in curated posts or launch day speeches. This time it would be written in filings, in bank freezes, in silence, and she would read every word. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No dramatic echoes, no raised voices, just the sterile quiet of legal procedure. Lena sat at the respondent's table, dressed in soft beige, her hair pulled back tightly as if tidiness could restore control. Beside her, Tyler Voss looked utterly misplaced. Tan, smug, dressed like court was just another investor pitch. He didn't look at me once. The judge, an older woman with thin-framed glasses and an expression carved from years of watching lies collapse under oath, scanned the files before her with slow deliberation. She began with the basics: petition, for divorce, division of assets, and then paused at the stack Daniel had handed her earlier. Before we proceed with standard financial disclosures, she said, her voice flat but firm, I see we have additional evidence submitted regarding potential misconduct. Daniel rose. Calm. Surgical. Yes, Your Honor. We have submitted documentation that includes financial transfers made without consent, use of marital assets to fund a separate business venture, and intellectual property misappropriation, both evidenced digitally and via verified third-party filings. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any monologue ever could. The judge turned to Lena. Mrs. Turner, how do you respond to the claim that you unilaterally liquidated over $600,000 in joint assets for use in a business not disclosed in your initial affidavit? Lena shifted, lips parted, clearly rehearsing, a version of the truth that sounded noble. Your Honor, I was in a vulnerable emotional place. The business was meant to be a new start. I didn't think, that much, the judge interrupted, is clear. A rustle of paper, more silence. Then the final blow. We also have documentation, Daniel continued, that suggests Mr. Voss received direct transfers from Mrs. Turner using marital funds, and that Canvas IQ's core technology was based on models authored and time-stamped by Mr. Turner months before its formation. Tyler finally moved then, leaned into his lawyer, whispering rapidly. The shift was sudden. His posture collapsed slightly, shoulders drawn in. The predator energy he carried on social media didn't survive real scrutiny. The judge marked her. Notes. Given the gravity of these claims, I am ordering an injunction on all related business activity pending resolution. Additionally, I'm referring Mr. Voss's involvement to the district attorney's office for review under the state's financial exploitation statutes. Lena's mouth dropped slightly open, not in dramatic shock, but the quiet realization that this wasn't a story she could rewrite. By the time we stepped out of that courtroom, the narrative she had worked so hard to curate had shattered. No brand language, no filtered photo dump, no soft focus explanation could unbreak what had now become legal fact. She had spent months trying to recast herself as someone evolved, liberated, reborn. But all it took was one hearing, just one, to reveal the truth. She hadn't leveled up, she had self-destructed, and I hadn't lifted a finger. I'd just let the truth walk in behind me. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment in Austin, coffee in hand, watching the skyline shift in the orange light of early evening. The city felt like a reset, less polished than Los Angeles, less performative, more grounded. I'd traded views of curated hillsides for real conversations, concrete plans, and people who didn't ask what you did before asking who you were. The divorce was finalized in late spring. Lena signed the settlement agreement with little ceremony. She avoided court by agreeing to full restitution of the funds she had taken, plus a public relinquishment of any claim to the IP behind Canvas IQ. Her startup never launched. Tyler Voss disappeared from the media cycle shortly after the DA's office opened an investigation. His silence, so loud on the internet, became absolute when subpoenas began arriving at his mailbox. Last I heard, he was being sued by another former co-founder from a separate venture. A pattern, a predator. Lena hadn't been the first. She probably wouldn't be the last. As for her, she moved back to the Bay Area, quietly this time. No announcements, no captions. I received a formal letter from her attorney acknowledging her cooperation in the fraud investigation in exchange for avoiding charges. Her name was now attached to restitution schedules and court-supervised compliance reviews. She'd be rebuilding her credibility in spreadsheets, not speeches. I didn't feel triumphant, just clear. In the months that followed, I focused on building something I'd postponed for years. A nonprofit focused on digital security education for underfunded school districts. The irony wasn't lost on me. My most painful personal betrayal became the catalyst for my most meaningful work. Sometimes life has a way of paying back the debt if you stay calm long enough to collect. There's someone new now. Andrea. Thoughtful, wickedly sharp, and unbothered by the noise of the world. She runs her own consulting firm, and unlike Lena, she doesn't need to be admired, just understood. We're not rushing into anything, but with her I don't feel like I'm being edited. Inside my apartment, there's only one photograph, from the past. Lena and me on our honeymoon, standing on a bridge in Paris, both smiling into a future we thought we shared. I don't keep it out of nostalgia or pain. I keep it as a reminder. Some people build castles on sand. I learned how to build stone. Eli's story isn't just about betrayal. It's about awareness. It's a reminder that in a world obsessed with image perception can be weaponized, and trust can be quietly eroded under the banner of ambition. What happened to him wasn't impulsive, it was strategic, calculated, and that's what makes it dangerous. We often think the biggest threat to our well-being is chaos, but more often it's manipulation in plain sight. It's paperwork signed without reading, conversations ignored because they're uncomfortable. It's the myth that love means never having to verify. Eli didn't fight fire with fire, he fought it with clarity, patience, and proof. There's a lesson here for anyone who's ever built something with someone else. Don't confuse shared space with shared intention. Know your numbers. Read your contracts. Pay attention when things feel off, not out of paranoia, but out of respect for what you've built. Now it's your turn. What would you have done if you were in Eli's place? Could you stay that calm, that methodical, while watching your life come undone? Tell us in the comments your thoughts, your stories, your takeaways. And if this story made you think differently about trust, justice, or even yourself, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who's about to need a reminder that the truth always leaves a trail.